This is strange, is the first thing I want to say. It's an odd experience talking to people who are distant in the way that we are now. But it occurred to me, just talking to Romilly before we started, that it is not unlike the radio experience itself, where your audience is an audience of one. So I shall, although in a sense, I feel I'm talking to my own room and the curtains I can see across it, the experience will be much more like talking to a single Zoomer. So I shall be talking, I hope, to you. Some of what I say you may have heard before, because it's sort of based on common sense and experience. And I know some of you have heard me speak before, so there's a very good chance that I will be repeating myself. I'll set out what I want to say before I say it, so that you have an idea of where we're heading. But I thought I'd start by saying that when I began writing for radio, more than 40 years ago now, I had the experience of getting the contract through the door before I had any letter of communication from the BBC, which was an odd way of doing it, and I suspect a mistake. But it was a very thrilling moment to get that first contract and to go up to the BBC and talk to my first radio producer, who was Michael Heffernan, a very charming and clever man. And in that conversation about my first radio play, which was called The Colonel's Wife, he said to me at one point, I very much like the way you dealt with inhibition in the subtext. And I remember very clearly thinking, crikey, I didn't know I was doing that. Perhaps I should pretend that I meant it all along, or perhaps I should simply say nothing. These days, I'm used to the fact that there are things that you write that you don't intend to write, that there is an air of mystery about some of the things that you write. Once you've written it and handed it over to someone else, it's out in the world, it belongs to the world, and the world can put its own spin on it, its own interpretation. So that notion of there being more in what you write than is obvious from than what you intended, I think is very much part of it. I think there are three things that you need to consider if you're writing narrative drama, which is what I will be talking about, drama with a story. The first is, what is the story, the actual sequence of events? How do they, what follows what precisely is the story? The second is that thing that I was just talking about with Michael Heffernan. What's it about? What is the story about? What is the subtext? What is the meaning? What lies beneath? It's not simply a sequence of events. It is about something. What's that? And the third thing you need to know is how do you tell the story? I hesitate to use the word tricks, but some of them are. What devices do you employ to make things work, to make the storytelling part of it work? And I shall be talking mostly about the last of those things. How do you make it work? They all interconnect and overlap, so that how you tell the story, what the story is about, and the sequence of events all feed into each other. But as I say, this is going to be mostly about what sort of things can I do to tell the story. What I shall be talking about specifically is this list of things: juxtaposition, punctuation, character, voice, narration, and if there's time, structure. There may not be time. If I come to a stop, I will simply stop. I'm going to be doing this by looking at some case studies. They are works that I've written myself because I know what I intended to do when I set about them. So it makes more sense for me to talk about things that I've done. I shall also suggest some short exercises that you can do. In a normal workshop, we would do these then and there. And I would give you 5 minutes in which to write something, and then we get some feedback on that. That's not the way it can work now. So what I'll do is spell out what those exercises are and let you take them away as homework, if you like, to either do or not do afterwards. Consider doing them, because very often I think an exercise, because it comes from outside you, can often spark a new way of beginning something that is quite productive. I've done 1 or 2 courses as a student where a writer has set an exercise and it's started a train of thought that has led to something else. It might have been a play, it might have been a book. So a humble exercise, which seems insignificant and rather small, can lead to other things. So do think about doing those exercises. They may prove useful to you. So that's the list of contents, if you like: juxtaposition, punctuation, character, voice, and narration, and possibly structure. But I'm going to begin by just briefly talking about the title. It's taken from Sebastian Barry. Writers don't do writing, they do listening, hearing, and seeing. And you can add to that another quotation from Joseph Conrad, who said, "The job of the writer is to make you hear, to make you feel, and slightly I paraphrase here, to make you see." So what that's talking about is really finding fuel for your imagination and content for what you're going to write. It's taking things in, seeing, listening, hearing, all those things feed into you. Of course, what writers do is more than that. Writers do writing, and there are other considerations that Sebastian Barry has skimmed over slightly, because there's the discipline of writing, there's the matter of invention, and there's the matter of imagination. All those come into it. And there's also the things that happen when you do sit down and write, when you begin to write, when physically you're sitting in front of a keyboard or a notepad and you're putting words on a screen or on paper. And then I believe things begin to happen. It's a little bit like painting, where once you put a shape or a color or a blob or a line on a canvas or a piece of paper, you've got something you can react against. It's the same with writing. Once you put down an idea, or even sometimes merely a word, you've made a start, even if the next thing you do is to edit it by cutting it out. It's still a start. You've got something to react against. Writing creates writing. The act of writing is a purposeful thing itself. And sometimes you can build up a rhythm of writing that is really quite productive. And you can, this sounds rather grand and a bit precious, but you can ride the wave of writing. You can be swept along by the sheer pleasure of invention and by the sudden discovery of where things are going. And in 40 years of writing, more than 40 years now, that has happened to me twice. It's not a big score, really, in the scheme of things, but they were memorable occasions, which is to say nothing about the outcome. I personally believe they were quite good plays, but they need not have been. You can also get quite good plays by really labouring quite hard. But that moment of riding the wave, I think, is also something to be relished in the process of writing. Otherwise, what writing is, and what this workshop will partly be about, is the struggle with language, which makes it sound rather dour. I don't mean it to be that. I mean it to be fun and enjoyable. But there is a struggle with language, which Eliot touched on. If you read Burnt Norton, you see that he talks about the difficulty of language and trying to get some sort of permanence in what you say. And another thing that Conrad said, he talked about writing as being rescue work carried out in darkness. I rather love that. I think it's a good way of looking at the nuts and bolts of writing, and drafting and redrafting. Rescue work carried out in darkness. I think that's rather good. So that's the title, and that's why that title was chosen. So to begin with my list, the first thing on it is juxtaposition, which is a very useful concept in writing in general, whether it's for radio or any other form, novel, poetry. It's setting one thing against another. It's one thing, you can see it again in artwork, where one figure is set against another figure, or one shape against another shape, a color against a color. And what you set next to a thing changes the thing itself. It either complements it or it contrasts with it. And this can happen many times over in writing for radio, in all sorts of different ways, by putting words next to each other. I'll say more about words a bit later on, but the setting side by side or in a sequence, one word followed by another word, or sounds, putting sounds together. An example of how juxtaposition with sounds can work is if you've got a terribly sad scene, for example, you might have a very peaceful soundtrack going underneath it, and that contrast does something. So thinking about juxtaposition as a way of telling your story is sometimes a very useful thing. It can happen with music as well. You can use music in ways of juxtaposing tone and mood, and even placing things geographically. Music can do that, or all sorts of other ways. And silence, I'll say more about silence a bit later on, because silence refers or leads into punctuation, what I intend to say about punctuation. But basically, you've got beats and pauses and silences. A beat and a pause are to do with the rhythm of the language. A silence is much more weighty. You could feel the weight of that. I mean, it was only a few seconds, but you know, the thought is anything going to follow this? Has something gone wrong? There are all sorts of things that fill a silence. Silence is like a vacuum. It needs to be filled, but it's very often filled with resonance. So it's a good idea to think about how you use silence when you're writing. It's, as well as words, you have those things to add to it as well. Scenes as well, they can be set next to each other. If you've had, for example, a very busy scene, it can be very effective sometimes to follow it with a very quiet scene, or vice versa. Short scenes followed by long scenes, then it builds up a rhythm across the piece itself as well. And also characters, they can be juxtaposed. You can have one sort of character who's complemented by another character, which is why very often in crime drama, I think you get partnerships, because Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson work together as a team. They complement each other. That sort of thing. It's another thing to think about in the way that you construct your radio dramas. And finally, objects themselves can be thrown in. I have this concept of random objects, which sometimes animate what you're writing, a script that, well, let me tell you, I was talking to a student many years ago at Lumbank on one of the Arden courses, and he wanted to write an argument. He had characters who had something to argue about, but it was becoming rather mechanical and rather pedestrian. And I said to him, well, throw in a random object. You can generate a random object by flicking through a page and sticking your finger on a page and coming to the first noun. We did that and came up with budgie. And he went away and wrote the row about a budgie in a cage, and it animated what he was doing. It's not a cure-all, it doesn't always work, but it can sometimes give you a tangential way in, throwing in a random object. So that's briefly something about juxtaposition and something to bear in mind, or at least keep in the back of your mind when you're writing. The next thing I want to talk about is punctuation. When you're writing radio drama or any kind of drama, it's not just about what people say, it's about the way people say it. And I think it's very important for a writer of drama to learn how to punctuate. That doesn't mean you need a manual of punctuation that you need to learn, but you do need basic punctuation that is consistent for you, that you know how you use it, because it gives you rhythm to what people are saying. I can give you some examples. It helps with rhythm, and it also helps with tone. But here's a little dramatic example. This is in verse, and consequently the verse plays a part to it. It's from a song which may or may not be familiar to you. And it goes like this. If you go down to the woods today, you're sure of a big surprise. If you go down to the woods today, you'd better go in disguise. For every bear that ever there was will gather there for certain, because today's the day the teddy bears have their picnic. Now, I think that's a brilliant lyric. And I think the power of it comes in that little tiny beat you get after the word because. For every bear that ever there was will gather there for certain, because. And in that tiny beat, what we're doing as listeners is saying, what will happen there? What will happen? And it is in fact a dramatic pause. It's the tiniest dramatic pause, but it is a dramatic pause, and it's your material. It's what you use, because today's the day the teddy bears have their picnic. So using punctuation in dialogue can emphasize that, or at least instruct actors as to the way you want things said. In fact, I think there's more than one writer who will say, if an actor is not sure how to say the line, well, don't just read the words, read the punctuation as well, then it will tell you. But you as writers what it does is give you control. Here's another little example, and again, you may know this as well. It's an old story. Try to say in your head, without counting, 5 ands, the word and 5 times, without counting, without doing a 2, a 2, and a 1, or going as you go. It's possible, but it's not straightforward. Now, having done that, listen to this little story. There was an innkeeper who wanted his inn sign painted, and the inn was called the Pig and Whistle, and he got the painter to start painting his new inn sign, and after a bit he came out to see how it was getting on, and the painter said to him, "How's it going? Do you think it's what you want?" And he said, "Well, what I think you need to do is to leave more of a gap between pig and whistle." there you've got 5 ands in a row. But because they are in context and because they have a rhythm to them, they make more sense, and you don't have to do that count to make them work. It's just another example of how rhythm is an important undercurrent in what you write. So, punctuation, it makes the intended rhythm that you mean to use very clear, and it also shows how various speeches end. You're not writing prose, so people don't always make clear and completed statements. Sometimes their statements trail off. Sometimes their statements are interrupted. I had a friend who talked, I'm now diverging onto dialogue, who talked about messing up the hair of dialogue. Write the dialogue and then acknowledge that when people speak to each other, they speak much more roughly and brokenly than if you were reading it on a page. So interrupt, repeat, dither, to reflect the way people speak. So I've slightly lost my thread. Yes, and endings, endings of sentences. So there are various conventions you can use in punctuation to end sentences. ... or dash. In the way I write, ... means the sentence is trailed off and incomplete because someone either, like as I did just then, loses his thread or cannot bear to say what he would say next. In other words, the sentence might be something like, you know what I've always thought about you, but I've never really had the courage to say is, well, you know that coat that you normally wear, ... Leave the person to fill in the rest. Or a dash means that's where the sentence is interrupted by the next speaker. Some people have a slightly different convention where they'll put a forward slash in where they precisely want that interruption to occur. It doesn't matter, you can do that if you like. I tend not to, but it's possible. It's just another form of punctuation that helps you with your replication of the way people speak, not just what they say, but the way that they say it. 2 other examples about the way people speak and the way they say what they say, not just what they say, but the way they say what they say. There was a series on television some years ago called something like The Secret Life of 4-Year-Olds. Many of you may have seen that. There was one little boy, obviously 4 years old, who was talking to his friend and trying to persuade him to come to his birthday party. And what he said was, and I was very struck by this, I thought, here is a master salesman in the making. He said, will you come to my party? And his friend said, well, I don't know, I'm not sure. I mean, they're quite forthright 4-year-olds. He said, I don't know. And he said, please come. Sweet corn will be there. Caramel will be there. Biscuits will be there. And I thought that was wonderful. That word order thing, sweet corn will be there, is much more persuasive somehow than there will be sweet corn. And he was 4. What I'm sort of suggesting is listen to the way people speak and take it over, use it. And that's a 4-year-old giving us a tip there. Sweet corn will be there. Another example. This is from Shakespeare. So what that suggests kind of is you can look all over the place for examples of how people speak and find rewarding examples and things that you can use and make use of. So this is from Twelfth Night, and I've always found this a really touching line, and it's hard to put your finger on it precisely, because in a sense there's very little to it. It's 10 words of one syllable, each one syllable, and it's when Viola is talking to Olivia, and she says to her at one point, "I see you what you are too proud." And I always think that's such a beautiful line. It's got such a bounce to it. I see you what you are too proud. And I would have thought, I mean, I've seen it several times, Twelfth Night, and I can't recall if this is the case or not, but that's the sort of line you want to make a move on, that you want to bounce across the stage towards her. And what she's saying to Olivia is, I can see through you, in a kind of innocent way. She's talking to someone who's socially superior to her. And yet she cuts through all the nonsense and says, I see you what you are too proud. And there is something about it which I find quite moving, which in a way goes back to what I was saying before about the mystery of writing. I don't know what Shakespeare was thinking when he wrote that line, but I don't know specifically whether he ever thought someone would be moved almost to tears by the purity and directness of that line. But there you are, it was. So that's quite a long exposition on punctuation and why it's kind of imploring you as writers, please look at punctuation and put it into your armory. But once you've got the way people speak and what they say and the way they say it, then you're heading towards character. And that's the next thing on my list. An introduction to character, first of all. E.M. Forster said, what we want, what we're looking for as writers, and probably as readers as well, is characters who surprise us in a convincing way. There is a notion of consistency about characters where you get script editors very often say, no, he wouldn't say that at that point. Well, I think that can be argued. There is a little book, it's very funny and well worth looking for if you can find it, called A Martian Wouldn't Say That. And it comes from a script editor's, a list of what script editors have said about scripts down the years. And there was one science fiction drama that the writer was writing, and they got the note back from the script editor or producer saying, scene 22, line 10, where the Martian speaks, a Martian wouldn't say that. Well, I think a writer can make an argument for their characters saying whatever, really. They can surprise us, but in a convincing way. If you can make a good argument for them saying whatever they say, then do so. There is a limit to the way you can create characters through a CV, what I'd call a CV approach. That is where you say, what do they look like? What do they wear? Where do they go to school? What's their family background? How rich are they? What work do they? All those things will give you an outside picture of them, and they can be very helpful. But what you want to do in creating a character, I think, is to build an inside picture as well. You need to know what your character is like on the inside. And I have 4 suggestions for the way you can do this. And as I said before, I mean, these are not original. You probably have come across these before, but it's worth focusing on and thinking about. And these are voice, getting the voice right, what I call the driving condition, what's the clockwork that makes a character work, secrets, and what goes with secrets is lies, secrets and lies, and finally pictures or images. Those 4 things can be little ways to unlock the inner life of a character. So I'll go through some of those step by step, beginning with voice. If you get the character right, then you're a long way forward in getting the plot right as well, because plot and character are very interlinked. And I think it was Aristotle. I think it was Aristotle. I think it was. I've written it down here, so I'm pretty sure it was Aristotle who said, "Plot is character revealed by action," and it's a good thing to remember. Good characters with an inner life generate plot. The first thing I'm going to talk about is voice, and there is a little image I'd like you to see here. This is an image from A Tale of Two Cities by Charles Dickens. And many of you will have read that. And if you haven't, I'm going to give a spoiler. So you may want to mute me until the image disappears, in which case you won't know what happens at the end. But if you're not too worried about that or have already read it, you'll know perhaps that this is Sidney Carton. And Sidney Carton is one of Dickens' favourite layabouts. He's quite fond of layabouts who haven't quite got a focus on their life. Sidney Carton is one of them. Dick Swiveller is another. There are several. Steerforth is a darker version of the same thing. What Sidney Carton does towards the end of the novel is he goes to the prison where the love of his life, her husband, is imprisoned and about to go to the guillotine, and he swaps places with her. It's a hugely noble act and heroic, and it suddenly brings him into focus and gives his life meaning. And on the way to the gallows, he meets this other character that he's with there now. This character is not the love of his life. It's a little seamstress. She's just called a poor little seamstress. She is caught up in all this French Revolution, and she is also on her way to the guillotine. So she is going to be executed at the same time. And Sidney Carton, as well as bringing about this act of nobility to save another man's life, also comforts this little girl on the way to the gallows. It's a hugely touching moment until she speaks. And this is what she says. "But for you, dear stranger, I should not be so composed, for I am naturally a poor little thing, faint of heart. Nor should I have been able to raise my thoughts to him who was put to death, that we might have hope and comfort here today." Well, this section is about voice, and that is the wrong voice for that character. There's a hugely touching moment where Sidney Carton is trying to comfort her, and she opens her mouth and the wrong voice comes out. What you've got there effectively is Charles Dickens, who is wonderful at voices and really obviously went around listening to what people were saying all the time, because he so often gets it right. Here he's got it wrong. I'm sure he won't mind me saying so. But this is Charles Dickens elbowing the little seamstress out of the way so that he can say what he wants her to say. It's not her voice, and she's not, excuse me, she's not speaking as she should. Now, as I say, he can get it right. Why he didn't get it right then is because he wanted her to say something. He imposed his voice on hers. It's a crime I've committed myself. Excuse me. It's a thing about Zooming. You talk more consistently than you do at other times. During lockdown, days of silence, then suddenly talking a lot. Excuse me. Yes, where was I? Yes, crimes against the truth. This is one of them. Yes, I remember writing in a radio series a speech or speeches that I felt were important to say, but were inconsistent with the voice of the character who was saying them. It's easy to do, but it's something to watch against, I think. Here is an example when Dickens gets it absolutely right. It's from the same book, but you could go to many of his books to get voices correctly defined by Dickens. But this is towards the end, not far from this moment, where Madame Defarge, the terrifying knitting woman who's bent on revenge on everybody and is going to pursue the Darnays as they make their escape, having been released from prison by Sidney Carton. Miss Pross, who is the lady's maid, who looks after Lucy Manette, the girl in the story, she finds herself barring the way of this terrifying Madame Defarge. And this is what she says. They have a fight, these two. It's a wonderful fight, and it's a terrific moment. The English, rather correct, reserved maid, and the terrifying French revolutionary. It's a punch-up, virtually, and it ends badly for one of them. And Miss Pross says to Madame Defarge, "I know that your intentions are evil, and you may depend upon it, I'll hold my own against them." And later she says, "No, you wicked foreign woman, I am your match." That's her voice. And that's true. You can tell that she's speaking with her own voice, and it's so much more effective. I think the little seamstress, the poor little seamstress, who not only is going to the guillotine, but is denied her voice, could have said exactly what Dickens wanted to Sidney Carton if she'd used her own voice, a voice that was true to her character. That would have worked. So, voice. How do you create voice? You attend to the rhythm, which takes us back to what we were saying about punctuation. You attend to vocabulary. You get the correct words that each character would use. And you attend to word order. Remember, sweet corn will be there, and not, quote, that we might have hope and comfort. Wrong. The best way to do this is not as you write, to mechanically say, I must do this, I must attend to the rhythm, I must attend to the word order, I must make sure that the vocabulary is correct. The best way to do it is to hear the voice in your head. And then when you redraft and go back and draft again, you can check those things to see that you've actually got them. Mainly, though, it is a matter of listening to people talking in shops, on trains and buses when those opportunities are back with us. Listen to people talk, the way that they talk, and bend it to your purposes. Now, here's a brief exercise that you can take. I'm just checking on the time. You can take away with you and try later. What I suggest that you do is to write a 60-second free-flowing paragraph on a fairly random subject. I'll give you two, and you could choose one or other. And if you don't fancy those, come up with a random subject of your own. I suggest cows or pavement. Write for 60 seconds in a free-flowing kind of way any thoughts that you have about those things, or one or the other of those things. It doesn't need to make sense. It just needs to be random thoughts. When you've done that, imagine a completely different character, someone not you. That presumably would have been in your own voice. This, I suggest, is the voice of someone else. I have suggested two possible characters that you might try: a retired dancer or a sullen shop assistant. Then rewrite the passage using their voice, just to see if you can get yourself to hear a different voice in your head. And that's something to take away and try. Now, I spent rather a long time talking about voice, and that was one of the things that you can use to put into creating character. Driving condition is the second of those things. What is it? It's the clockwork that makes something tick, that makes people act. It's what propels them into action. And it's quite often what something wants. It's something deliberate to do with what they want. But sometimes it's a passive thing. And I often give an example, again, from my own work, of a character I made whose name was Daisy, who was a waitress. And her driving condition, the thing that made her work as a piece of drama, was that she had this quality that people would talk to her. She didn't know that she had it. She was quite innocent about it. But whenever she got talking to people, they would reveal their secrets to her and tell her really quite damaging secrets at times. But that's what she did. And that's how the drama was able to unfold, because Daisy had this driving condition of making people talk, revealing their secrets in a quite innocent way. You might ask yourself, from what we've just seen of Sidney Carton and Miss Pross, those two characters from Dickens, what might their driving condition be? Sidney Carton's, well, you could think of several things. There's sometimes more than one driving condition that will get a character working at all. But it's having something that makes them work as characters. I'll say no more about that, but move on to secrets and lies. Lies, secrets help us get a picture of the inner life of a character, so we can understand their inner life. And they in themselves can create drama. If someone's keeping a secret, it's the discovery of the secret, or the keeping of the secret, whatever lengths you go to keep that secret or to discover it, can propel drama as well. You only have to think of two characters, an A and a B, and think of all the permutations you can have of secrets and lies between them. A can have a secret from B, B from A. They can each have a secret from each other. A can have a secret about B that B doesn't know that A knows, and so on and so on. With just two characters, it's endless. No, it isn't endless. It's mathematically limited, but you can see what I mean. Add a third character and the permutations are even greater. So here's an exercise based on character. Oh, no, I've missed out pictures and images, which I think is also very important. What I suggest sometimes is that you imagine people going up into their attic and finding an object up there, or an old photograph, a snapshot or something. What would that be? And it very often tells a story or some part of their inner life. And this is very useful for three reasons. One is it makes the telling of the story more concrete. There is something absolutely existing that you can pin it to. It might be a pair of skates, or it might be an artist's brush, or a hairbrush, or a mirror, all sorts of things it could be. So it makes it concrete, and making things concrete is part of the writing process. The second thing it does is provide a link to people's past, an old photograph. It might be an old photograph of a soldier sitting on a box, and you begin to say, who is this? What's the significance of this person? And so on. And the third thing it does is play to the strength of radio as a visual medium. I mean, people often think of radio as a non-visual medium. You can't see the pictures, therefore pictures don't exist. But pictures do exist in a very vivid way. And it's your job as a writer to plant those pictures in the heads of the listener, which you do by being quite sparing with words and very careful with words. But creating pictures is part of the job of the audio radio writer. So that leads me on to an exercise where you can try this for yourself. 2 characters. And I'm going to ask you to think, as you look at those pictures, of the voice of these 2 people. What might their voice sound like? I mean, sometimes it takes quite a long time to get hold of someone's voice. But you can get some idea from looking at the picture of the sort of way they'd speak, their rhythms of speech, the word order they might use, the kind of vocabulary they might use. And think about what their driving condition might be. Are they intent on revenge? Are they intent on escape? What sort of thing might, how are they anything to do with each other? What might their driving condition be? And what might their secrets and lives be? What secrets does each of them have? And who knows about those secrets? Does everybody know except them? Do they know about each other's secrets? And finally, if they went up into their attic, what would they bring down? An object or an old photograph that was particularly relevant to them and somehow told you something about their inner life. Now, having thought about those things, I'm going to ask you 3 tangential questions about these characters that will give you little glimpses into their inner life. You can note down the questions now, and you can think about them afterwards and write, if you like, look quite an extensive answer to these questions. The first one is, I'd suggest you choose one of these characters, look at him and say, what is your recurring dream? If you imagine that one of these people having a dream that keeps coming back to them night after night, what is that dream? Secondly, what is the place where you long to be? Again, look at these characters and think, choose one of them and ask, where is it that you long to be? And finally, who or what are you most scared of? And those tangential questions lead you into glimpses into their inner life, which will also in turn lead to storytelling. Now, these are, in fact, Mr. Ogmore and Mr. Pritchard from Under Milk Wood. They're ghosts. And this is what Dylan Thomas says about them. This is his description of them. This is Mr. Ogmore, linoleum, retired, and Mr. Pritchard, failed bookmaker. That's a tiny little description for each of them. Linoleum, retired, and failed bookmaker. But they're absolutely pinpoint accurate. And because they're brief, they leave room for expansion. You, as the listener, can fill in the gaps. And I think it reveals that as a writer, you don't have to say a lot about a character, but what you have to say can be brief, but telling. And that linoleum retired, failed bookmaker is spot on. I'm going to just talk briefly about a character case study. This is a created character I created for a play of mine. This is the third image, if we could, Dilys. I'll say a bit about it's Shakespeare. The difficulty in this case is writing a real life person, someone who did exist, and you're trying to represent him in the in a play. This was a play called A Play for the Heart, which is about the 400th anniversary of the death of Shakespeare. And here he is. Yes, you can see now. That, in fact, is the actor who played Shakespeare. That's Robert Lindsay. And he's in the bed that is at Mary Arden's farm in Warwickshire, just outside Stratford, because we recorded this on location. You can see there's a microphone there. And because it's his last day, he spends quite a bit of it in bed. And he is labouring under the fear of all his worries crowding in on him. I often wondered whether it was beneficial to be recording on location. Most radio plays are recorded in studio, or these days in lockdown in people's homes, but mostly in studio, which gives you a lot of flexibility. Recording on location, I think there may have been some benefit to the actors for doing this. It was certainly nice to be in the bitter cold in February in Warwickshire, and to tread where those characters would have trodden. The difficulty in writing Shakespeare is, first of all, how dare you do that? How dare you write your version of the world's greatest playwright? That's a difficult one before you start. And I try to overcome this by making him the wonderful writer that he is, but making him a stumbling speaker, someone who was hesitant and forever correcting himself. So that gave him speech rhythms as well. And making him a writer who worried about the things that writers worry about. Now, I'm talking to writers, so you may find this list of things that what writers worry about familiar, and you may be lucky and you don't. But certainly this Shakespeare was worried about, does the writing mean anything at all? Is it entirely ephemeral? Is it going to disappear when I do? Where is my next idea coming from? And most disturbing of all is, am I losing control of the language? And all those worries were hounding him during his final days, and he needed reassurance about the answers to those questions, basically. And here is a short example of him worrying about that last one, the loss of language. And he talks about the loss of words, the general loss of words themselves, the feeling I sometimes have, the sense that I'm in a boat and I've missed the oars. They've slipped away from me. I can see them turning away on the current, and the boat slews. It shifts sideways and it's taking me away. I don't know where. Sometimes today I've felt the oars slipping through my hands. I felt it happening. So yes, I am afraid that I'll forget and then be forgotten. Nothing said, nothing to remember me by, if that really matters. I don't know if it does. So that's one of the things that was driving him on this final day. I'm speeding through towards the end because I've taken up more time than I intended to. One extra thing to say about this particular play was connecting with something I said earlier about juxtaposition, putting two characters together. And in this play, Shakespeare, who happened to be in London at the same time as William Harvey, who discovered the circulation of the blood, putting those two characters together in a chance encounter created certain sparks. They were both interested in the heart, but for different reasons. And they found correspondences as well as differences. So that, for me, as a writer, was a very useful juxtaposition. What I'm going to do now, because I've rabbited on for too long, really, is miss out the next bit, talking about narrating, and go on to conclude with the Honorary Consul, a brief look at the. I don't know if it's if I'm mucking you about, Dilys, or can you possibly put the final image of the Honorary Consul script up? Is that possible, or must they go through the sequences? I just want to look at a bit of this script and then hear a clip, and then I'll stop because I've said too much already, I suspect. But while we're looking for the image, the Honorary Consul is Graham Greene's splendid novel about someone who was kidnapped by mistake. They thought he was an important person and he wasn't. Yeah, here we are. This is a scene 22 from the Honorary Consul. And it's the scene towards the end of the novel where the person the Honorary Consul who's been kidnapped by mistake is held by his kidnappers, and they're surrounded by the police who've finally discovered them. And you've got the two central characters, Dr. Pla, who is a sort of English dried husk of a character. His driving condition in a way is not to become emotionally involved in anything. It's often done with Graham Greene, and I think very effectively. And the other characters involved here are Leon, who is the leader of the rebels who done the kidnapping, who was a priest in his previous existence. People always call him Father Leon, or priest, or father, and he always objects to that because he's a failed priest, or one who's rejected his priestdom, but somehow cannot shake it off. And here he's been persuaded to take a final mass for all those who are pinned down. And there are several things going on here. One, different sorts of language being used, and different ways of addressing the audience, sometimes as a narrator talking directly out to the audience, sometimes talking to each other in forms of dialogue, and sometimes going through the Mass, both in Latin and in translation. And there are also prayers. Leon is praying. He's praying publicly as part of the Mass, but he's also praying privately. So we get different head voices. I'll leave it there. And if we could possibly just, while that's going up, can we also hear the final clip?
cloth for the table, but not a good one.
Early Sunday morning, Marta prepares the table for Mass.
Only 2 candles, Father. All we have left.
It won't matter.
It's not how I wanted it to be.
She sets out the old medicine bottle for the wine, a matte gourd for the chalice.
I shall pray for Diego and Miguel. For all who die today.
Not for me.
You can't tell me who to pray for.
I believe in nothing.
So stay in your corner and believe nothing, and I'll still pray for you.
So, with the light lifting and Perez and his men waiting outside, Leon begins the Mass.
Maiorem hac dilectionem nemo habet, ut animam suam quis ponat pro amicis suis.
He makes the old secret signals with his hands.
Hec quotiescumque faceritis in mei memoriam facietis.
As often as you do these things, do them in remembrance of me.
You have 50 minutes left.
I picture my father. The last time I saw him, how he turned and waved.
Agnus Dei qui tollis peccata mundi.
Lamb of God, who takes away the sins of the world. Did I care for him?
Miserere nobis.
Have mercy on us.
Miserere nobis.
Would I have abandoned him? A stooped old man.
Agnus Dei qui tollis peccata mundi, dona nobis pacem.
Would I have run off? Left him to die?
I repeat, you have 50 minutes left.
Requiem aeternam dona eis Domine.
Eternal rest grant unto them, O Lord,
Et lux perpetua luceat eis.
and let perpetual light shine upon them.
Requiescant in
May
pace.
they rest in peace.
If you send the consul out now, you can save your lives.
O Lord, deliver me.
Grant them eternal rest.
45 minutes.
Let me not have to kill him.
Requiem aeternam dona eis.
Deliver me. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you. And all I'll say about that is that, just to go back to juxtaposition again, there is the sound of the police gathering outside the compound and speaking through loud hailers, set against this rather intimate representation of the Mass. So you've got church and state set next to each other, juxtaposed. And what I'll do is leave it at that. I must apologise for not doing all that I said that I do. I went on far too long and at length about other things, but I see that our time is running out, so I should stop there in case there are any questions, and if I can possibly answer them, I'll do that. So, Romilly, if you're with us.
I am. Nick, thank you so much for that. I love that phrase that you used. Radio is a visual medium. That for me was almost the most memorable thing you said. And I loved your idea of what would the character bring from the attic that would kind of embody who they are. I thought that was a brilliant question. There are some questions that people have volunteered, which I've put in the chat for you, although I was learning to do that and it was a little confused. But if I tell you the kind of broad headings, you'll see them in the chat. So there are 2 questions about punctuation, one about one-person plays, one about dialect and accent, one about experience and playwriting, one about beginnings and endings, and I've just posted a final one about voiceovers. So I don't know which of those you would like to start with. I didn't know if one would appeal to you more than another.
Well, just take them in sequence, if I can give a quick answer.
So in sequence, we start with punctuation. From Tony Vale, would you indicate which word in a sentence to be overemphasized, or should or would you leave that to the actor based on the context of the scene?
That's a good question. a quick answer. Mostly, I think you would leave it to the actor, because it's a collaborative process, and the actor has a very important role to play. But sometimes you will want an emphasis that is slightly different from what seems obvious. So then it's legitimate to. On the whole, I'd avoid doing it, but on occasions it is necessary. Yes, so I'd do that. Yes.
Great. From Sean Lang, do you think writers can dictate details of punctuation too much? How much leeway should we give leave to actors? And then he puts in brackets, I always think about this convention of using an A/2 to indicate where another character should interrupt. When I see that in a script, I always think, why not trust the actors?
Yes, good question. Hello, Sean, thank you. I agree with you, really. I mean, writers are different, and I think it's right that they should devise their own regime of punctuation. However, it's not a thing I use, because I think it is actually important to trust the actor. As long as your meaning is clear, as long as by treading on each other, they don't tread on key things that you want heard, I think as a rule, it's not a bad one to trust the actor.
Great, thank you, Nick. One person plays, this is from Jessica Porter. Are one person radio plays effective as there is no visual, ? Or is it more effective to introduce more characters for the listeners?
Well, both can be effective. If you think of, you probably know Spoonface Steinberg, absolutely wonderful play, a single voice, and it is visual. That you can see a lot of what's going on in that because of the way the little girl talks to you. If you don't know, it's a play by Lee Hall prior to Billy Elliot, and it's immensely touching and beautifully written. It's a wonderful play. I think the answer is that each play will have its own demands about how many characters it needs. And although, I mean, money comes into this, these days it's hard to afford a large cast, even on radio. So it's always a good thing to go to a small cast if you possibly can. And large casts can sometimes be confusing. You need to differentiate voices, and that's sometimes a difficult thing to do. I'm wobbling around this one because I think the real answer is that there are both can work extremely well.
Thank you, Nick. The next question is about dialect and accent from Tony Vale. Would you write in dialect, or would you write the dialogue in ordinary language and leave the actor to be influenced by the accent they adopt?
Yes, that's the second of those. I think it's restrictive to try and copy dialect precisely. What you can and should do is pick up the rhythms of different types of speech, different parts of the country, different class backgrounds, if you like, all sorts of different ways that people do speak. And that should be represented in the rhythm and the vocabulary and the word order that you use. But actual Barnes type spelling or corrupt, no, that's a bad choice of word. I don't mean corrupt, but spelling in dialect terms, I think, is probably a barrier for the actor, really.
Nick, am I right in remembering, and I could be wrong, that in The Witness there was an echo of Dorothy L. Sayers, and that regional accents were used in your
yes, there were regional accents in that, and the thinking behind that was to make it have a modern resonance, and therefore it went on stage eventually also, but in its radio manifestation, the idea was that there was a big place in the south, which seemed to be London, and that these were people from the north, and therefore they tended to have northern accents. There was as it turned out, there's no significance especially in this, that the Judas character who was from the north happened to come from Manchester, so he was kind of set apart as slightly different. There's no slur on Manchester intended in that.
So yeah, thank you.
So not written in dialect as such.
No,
but with the rhythms.
The next question is about experience in playwriting from Jessica Porter. Do you think that you should only write about things that you have experience of? Thanks.
Well, no. I think that what a play is about very often is not necessarily the nuts and bolts of what you actually hear, of the story itself. It's about what I was talking about earlier, the inner life, and that I think can be common experience. I know the American short story writer Flannery O'Connor said that you have enough experience by the time you're 5 to fill your writing life, or words to that effect. You know what it is to be afraid, you know what it is to be joyful on occasions. You know what it is to be suspicious or doubtful or in love, all those things, and they inform what you're writing. I remember writing a play about boy soldiers in Sierra Leone years ago. I'd been to Sierra Leone, but I had no experience of what they went through. That was research, but I did have experiences of loss that could feed into the telling of that play.
Thank you. Then a question about beginnings and endings. This is from Margaret Hunt. Do you always know how it's going to end when you start writing?
No, no. What I tend to say is that beginnings they're not easy, but there are 100 beginnings for every one single ending. Endings are more difficult. I can't give you any comforting words on that. They're difficult to do, and I think there are many great works which don't end well, because it's so difficult to. One thing I would say that has sometimes been useful, that is to end, the cliche of the Western that ends with a stranger riding off into the sunset. Well, that's an image, that's a picture, and it sums up an awful lot. It talks about loneliness and a job having been done and riding off somewhere else. But all that is said in the picture, and very often you can end on a picture. Even in radio, you can end on a picture, and the picture does some of the work for you. The thing to avoid is trying to say, as I think a lot of people do when they write poetry, that the final stanza is, and this is what the poem is about. Cut it. And I think you want to avoid that in writing a play as well. And this is what that play was just about.
Thank you. The next question is about voiceovers, Nick. It's from Susie Pottinger. What are the rules for using voiceover well in a radio play?
Well, that's one of the sections I've apologetically missed out on narration, voiceovers. I think it's a very useful radio tool, because radio is very close to original storytelling, and to have a storyteller, I think, can be part of your armory, and a good way of going about it. and there are very many different ways of doing narration. You can have a third-person narrator who tells the story from outside. It's more effective very often on radio to have someone who's involved in the story. For example, that last clip you heard from the Honorary Consul, Graham Greene's story, I think, is more or less third person. But in radio, we use two narrators to tell the story, the Honorary Consul and Dr. Pla. And there was a practical reason for there being two, in that one of them dies. And consequently, when he dies, he stops speaking. So you needed someone to tell the rest of the story, basically. I won't tell you which one died. Read the book. It's well worth doing. But that, you know, that turned out to be a beneficial choice. Involved narrators or multi-narrators, as in Witness, where there are lots of different people who come in and tell a bit of the story from their own personal point of view. That can be effective as well. So you build up a kind of tapestry. But certainly I think it's a thing to be considered and not ignored. I mean, there are some purists who say, you know, it's the easy way out to have a narrator. But it isn't easy, and it isn't a way out. It's a way of developing the storytelling in a very productive kind of way, I think.
I just had one final question for you, Nick, which was more about your experience than anything that many of us are ever likely to be faced with. But clearly your writing is a combination of things that you're writing with either a blank sheet of paper, almost wholly original, or you're writing where actually, as with The Archers, you're writing for something where the characters and some of the plot lines are already given. And I wonder how in yourself, what the difference is between approaching those two different kinds of playwriting.
Yes, that's a good question. It is different. I mean, it applies to adaptation, and even writing for The Archers is a kind of adaptation. So in a sense, it's more technical. You have to abide by, if for example, you're adapting a book, say Barchester Towers, then you have an obligation to not just the story, but the spirit of the book. You can do all sorts of inventive things with it, but you do have that obligation to stick to the book. And in that case, that specific case, because Trollope, if you read Trollope, his voice is such a significant part of the experience. You want to keep some of that for the experience of the radio listener as well. So you're doing slightly different things. If you've created a character of your own, and I have a series called Holding Back the Tide, which is on the week after next on Radio 4. They're characters that I created, and I can do what I like with them. So that's not so restricting, but sometimes, you know, restriction can be beneficial to you.
Okay, Nick, thank you. We're coming up to 4 o'clock, which was our time to conclude. You'll see that people are putting words of thanks into the chat, and on their behalf, I would like to express our very real thanks to you for your careful preparation, the insight that all of your years of playwriting has given you, and how generously and openly you've spoken, as well as the practical exercises and the very clear directions that you've given us. And I hope that we'll all go away. I like to dabble and dabble a little using some of the exercises that you've given. If I could thank everyone for coming to this Radius workshop. We're learning to do more things online, as everyone is, but I do encourage you to visit our website. If you're not a member of the Society, to consider membership and take that out, and hope that we'll see many of you again at our next workshop. I'm just looking for my colleagues on council. If I've forgotten anything, could you put it into chat now before I sign us off, please?
Can I say thank you to Romilly and to Dilys for making this possible, and to Radius for asking me, and to all of you for listening. Thank you very much. I'm sorry that I missed out. There are about 5 pages that I didn't get through.
That's great, but thank you, Nick. And I'm just being reminded that we have a Facebook page and a very active Twitter feed that you can sign up to. So please do keep an eye for them. Nick, thank you very much. Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you to Dilys, who's hosted for us. We'll look forward to seeing you all again soon. Goodbye.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye.